Hey everybody, the September 2020 Rahdo Roundup is brought to you by Fun Again Games. And I gotta say, folks, September was a very, very big month for me. I mean, not only did we play a whole ton of games, I'm gonna be talking about 27 games today, which I think might be a record for the Roundup. I'm not quite sure. But for me, even more importantly than all the great games Jan and I played, my first board game design is on Kickstarter. Dun dun dun! Not exactly. I have not gone back into the design business. Yes, I did video games for 20-some years, but I'm not becoming a board game designer. However, a very close friend of mine has put his game on Kickstarter. It just went live this week. It's called Plunderous. I've talked about it in the past. Maybe you've heard of it. And personally, I have now spent, over the last 9 months, over 200 hours contributing to the design of this game. Now, my main focus has really been on the cooperative / solo expansion that you can get as part of the bundle for Plunderous, which is on Kickstarter now. But I've had a pretty big impact on the standard version of the game, which is a 4X steampunk pirate game of, exploring, expanding, exploiting, and exterminating. I'm all about trying to make that expansion work without the extermination between players. But, like I said, actually, over the last 9 months, more and more of my ideas have made it into Plunderous as well. So I'm kind of a co-developer maybe on Plunderous. And so if you're interested in what a design from me might look like, again, that's not what this is, but this is probably as close as you're ever going to get. If you want to go check out Plunderous, which is on Kickstarter right now, you can hit that eye in the top right corner of the screen to go learn more. But enough self-promotion. Let's get that out of the way. And actually, let's go on ahead and start with the monthly countdown. As always, I'm going to be talking about Jen's and my least favorite to our favorite games. So there will be a new game of the month. And as has been the case now, before we get to Jen's and my countdown, I need to talk a little bit about a few games that Shea Parker, my main run-through contributor, has done. He played 3 games this month, starting with, what was it? It was, Embarcadero, which I think is maybe still on Kickstarter Live right now for another day or so. It's just about over. And, as always with our paid Kickstarter previews, you should bear in mind that, we were paid mostly to do the run-through, but we gave our opinions. Now, I have not played Embarcadero, but I've watched Shea's run-through, and it looks very, very cool. This is, instead of being a tile-laying game, this is all about, doing sort of area control and building up a big communal, little city of sorts, container city, which is based on the real historical development of San Francisco, California, where when ships docked during the gold rush, people got off and started, headed to the hills, but they turned those ships into actual living buildings, and they built buildings on top of the ships. So this is a game where you're building and, basically claiming territory, spreading out, but also building upwards. And it seems really, really very clever. I chose not to cover it for the channel because I was worried it might be a little bit too, in your face with the area control elements, but you can check out Shea's run through. It's really a very, very clever design, Embarcadero. And then Shea also hit Galaxy Hunters, which is an interesting game because at first glance, this looks like a big, elaborate Ameritrash style game where you're piloting space mechs and flying all around the galaxy, hunting down kaiju monsters to destroy them. And so you might think this is a big dice-heavy, crazy action fest. It's actually a worker placement game, where you are actually sending your workers out to, harvest resources from the various planets that are under assault and under threat from the big space monsters. And it's just that one of your workers that you can send out happens to be in a big, gigantic space mech. And so that worker, who is supplemented by all the other workers, can actually go out and fight the monsters. And it seemed very, very sharp. I was really surprised in that it is very Euro-y. It's kind of around the same level as almost a Lords of Waterdeep style, gateway to worker placement, but with a very dramatic, very kind of anime-ish feeling, setting, which is very different than the normal worker placement games that Jen and I play. So that was really interesting, and I think that Kickstarter is actually over for the paid coverage that Shea gave it, but it seemed like a neat game. If that's something that sounds interesting, you can check it out. And then finally, Shea also covered Inventure Quest, which is a very sharp, neat-looking little game. If you go check out Shea's run-through of this, which, again, was a paid preview because it's on Kickstarter, he actually got his roommate, Nick, to play along with him, and it's a lot of fun because this is a game that turns collaborative storytelling into an interactive adventure because every round we draw a bunch of cards that give us kind of settings and scenarios and circumstances we find ourselves in, and we use those to collaboratively tell the story of the world we're going through. By default it's fantasy, but I believe the system is broad enough that you could pretty much put it in any setting you want, sci-fi, modern day, whatever. And the trick, the gameplay element, as I understand it from watching Shea and Nick play, is whoever is the lead player, based on what their character can do, comes up with a solution that, how they want to solve the current roadblock they're facing. And the other players have to take their best educated guess as what they think the lead player is going to do. And if they guess correctly, we succeed. And if we guess poorly, we fail and fall back. So it almost kind of has like a Dixit feel to it, but it's a cooperative game, which again is all about collaborative storytelling. And if you watch Shea's video, you'll see he and Nick, they went crazy deep into the lore of this world. They were kind of filling out as they experienced it. Very, very neat game. And definitely, I hope, if that sounds at all interesting to you folks, again, this was a paid Kickstarter preview. It's still live right now, and it seems like it's it's kind of slow going, but it's such a clever design. Check out Shea's video, decide for yourself. But I really do hope this succeeds because the industry needs more really outside of the box stuff, and this does a lot of really neat things. So that was Shea's third game he covered this month, Inventure Quest. All right, so we are done with Shea. Let's start Jen's and my countdown. Starting at the top of the list, the game that resonated with us the least, that would be Draconis Invasion, which I have to admit, I've had a prototype of for years. I've been carrying this around, and it's been on my Rahdo request geek list. You go to request@rahdo.com to request that I film games, and if people thumb it, it'll eventually get filmed. And Draconis Invasion, after all these years, finally had enough thumbs that Jen and I sat down and played this prototype I've been carrying forever. And it's a sharp little deck building game. It is a kind of dark fantasy world where players are competing to be the best at saving this world from all the monsters by building up their deck, filling it full of defenders who they can use to fight monsters and score points. It's very Dominion-y in that it follows the system where, as part of setup, you put out all the different cards that players can buy, so everybody knows it's not like an Ascension-style thing where new cards are coming in all the time, and so you can make strategies. Okay, if I buy some of these, those will combo well with those, and all that sort of thing. And the core gameplay is solid. Here's the interesting twist to Dominion-style gameplay. There's largely two types of cards you can buy. Defenders, which are heroes and monster killers and stuff like that go into your deck because they can actually generate the fight power to fight off all the bad guys and score points. But there are also action cards, which are much more Dominion-y. They allow you to get extra actions or do extra buys or find ways to convert resources into other resources, all that kind of stuff. Here's the thing. Your startup deck, much like Dominion, comes with a bunch of money and a few basic little fighter cards. And as you start increasing your ranks, putting really strong fighters into your deck, the problem is when you draw them, the fighters, well, you had to pay money to recruit them. And then you have to pay money again to get them to fight. So if you have a really big, super strong Dragon Slayer who won't go fight unless you've got 5 gold, you have to pay 5 gold to recruit him. You got to pay 5 gold every time you want him to fight. And so as you're going through the deck, you will sometimes get these really big superheroes at the same time that in your hand you had a bunch of money cards. Think Dominion. And other times they'll come up and you might not have enough money to get them to fight. And so it's an interesting idea, and I think it works. It's kind of similar to Dominion Potions in that you get cards that need this particular resource, potions, to be able to run. Here, the money that's in your deck is the resource you use to buy more cards, but it's also the money you use to pump into your existing cards to make them work. It's a cool idea, but it does add kind of a lot of variance and almost randomness. And we thought it worked. And I gotta say, folks, this game has been out for quite a while. It's had expansions. It's very, very popular. It has a huge following. But for me and Jen, we found ourselves thinking, well, this is very dark and grim. I think we'd rather just play Dominion, quite frankly. And so it didn't really resonate with us. But like I said, there's a lot of people out there that really love my number 24. And I do agree. It's got some very, very cool, interesting ideas. Draconis Invasion. Then we move on to number 23, the 7th Citadel, which is my first paid Kickstarter preview on the list. And this is a follow-up, not a sequel, but a follow-up to one of the biggest, hottest games that have come out in the last 5 years, the 7th Continent. And this is a huge box full of dozens, if not hundreds of hours of gameplay as you slowly explore. In 7th Continent, it was a dark jungle strewn, mysterious island. Now you're in a fantasy world, trying to bring light back to a desolate, blighted land that's overrun with monsters. Typical fantasy stuff. And so it's a new setting, but really the same gameplay as 7th Continent, which has always been very, very cool. This idea that your deck of cards that represent your life is also where you're drawing cards to give you special abilities. And when you try to do skill checks, you have to draw multiple cards and try to get successes off of them instead of rolling dice. So management of your cards is everything. The biggest difference between 7th Citadel and 7th Continent, the previous one, is the old game was what did I call it? I called it an exploration game. Predominantly. Whereas this is an adventure game. And so a lot of the tropes that were in 7th Continent, like having to feed your people or starving and going hunting and all that, are gone. Now you're much more like a shark, moving forward, having adventures with more of a purpose instead of... and in that way, I think 7th Citadel will appeal to a lot of people that maybe found 7th Continent a little bit too... directionless, for lack of a better term, because you have a goal, you know what you're going out there doing. And also, if you played 7th Continent and wish you had a lot more fighting, 7th Citadel is your game, because of course you're coming across monsters, and the monsters they're much tougher to beat. They have multiple stages. Some of the the skill checks with fighting and whatnot has really been elevated and advanced quite a bit. So, why did it rate so low, considering Jen and I love 7th Continent? Two things. One, this universe you're in is very, very grim, very dark, very heavy, and as we were playing through it, Jen's like, this is just too dark for me. I would like to be in a happy fantasy universe if I could, or even just kind of like a medium, where as opposed to some of the really harrowing stuff you come across here, as just Jen found it was not to her taste. Of course, there's a lot of people who love grim, dark stuff, so more power to you, but, Jen just did not enjoy her time here. And then also, like I said, 7th Citadel really doubles down on the skill checks. You do a lot more of them. They're a much bigger part of the game. And honestly, skill checks were our least favorite thing about 7th Continent. And so, it accentuates the stuff we didn't like. It created a universe Jen didn't want to be in. So, while it is still a great game, if you enjoyed 7th Continent, I suspect if you don't have those two hangups, you'll really dig 7th Citadel. For us, it comes in at number 23, the 7th Citadel. Then we go on to 22, Silver and Gold, which is a very neat roll and write from Phil Walker Harding, who is, definitely a designer of note. I mean, love Baron Parks, love so many of his designs. And I got to admit, when I first played this last year at a convention, and Jen played it too, we were taught by somebody, and we loved it there. We had a great time. And so I was so happy to finally get a copy of it, and I was planning on doing a run-through, and Jen and I sat down to play it at home, and we're like, oh, we weren't quite taught the rules right. And there are a few key rules in this game, which, by the way, has a brilliant core conceit of having it's a roll and write where you write on your cards. That's just fun. It is really neat, and as you fill your cards up, you draw more of them, and you're trying to make combo chains, kind of like a light Gonchon's clever, combo chain explosion type thing going on. There's a lot of really neat ideas here, but there's two things that we weren't aware of from our original play that we do not like at all. The biggest one is there is a healthy memory element, which just does not compute. Do not care for it. That because you're not rolling dice, instead you're flipping cards, and so every round there's like a couple of the T-shaped cards, and there's a couple of the L-shaped cards, and you're trying to think, right, did the second L-shaped card come out? I don't remember. When we played it before, we just kept it all public knowledge so everybody could look. But when we found out that, no, you don't get to do that, you have to memorize, you're like, no, hated it. And, because Silver and Gold would have been top 10. easily this month if it weren't for the memory requirement. I do not see why it's there. I suspect the developers just did it to make sure people don't overthink and overanalyze, but it really chafed our hides that the game expected us to have to memorize what cards it played if we wanted to play at peak efficiency. The other thing was, it has this very weird turn order structure that just makes you spend a lot more time fiddling about, right, who's first player now, who's the lead player, who breaks ties and all that. I'm not at all keen on how that was done either. It should have been resolved every round instead of every turn, something like that. So those two things really kind of put a damper on our enthusiasm for Silver and Gold. I do think it's sharp if you don't mind a little bit of memory, or if you don't mind house rules, because this game could instantly be fixed by two of the simplest house rules ever. Don't make it memory. Let players look and see what all cards have already been played, and only only change turn order at the end of every round, or something simple like that. But I got other games to play. I don't really want to pursue house rules, and so Silver and Gold, sadly, comes in at number 22. But again, it's a really good game, which is two really dumb rules. Alrighty, then we go on to number 21, Renature. Now, this is the latest from the design super duo, Kramer and Kiesling. They are back, and this is a competitive game where we are trying to rejuvenate a kind of blighted area of nature by repopulating it full of animals. And as the animals come back in, that starts bringing, as the fauna comes back in, the flora starts regrowing, and we're bringing these animals in with dominoes, using standard domino rules where matching animals have to match against other animals. Although the interesting thing is, we are kind of constricted to all these different lanes that we can expand, so it's not quite so freewheeling as regular dominoes, and that creates some very interesting and challenging puzzles, especially when you get into this spot where some symbols on the dominoes are wild cards, and you can put them wherever you want. So there's a lot of interest. We loved the domino tile laying, and the way the animals kind of expanded and literally rejuvenate this bit of nature, renatured the game. That was awesome. The thing is, after a given blighted area is completely surrounded, it is scored for majority based on who had the most plants grow because they placed dominoes next to it. And that's fine too. We don't mind a little bit of cutthroatedness with area control. Okay, well, I came in first, you came in second because I swept in there. Here's the problem. In addition to the dominoes that belong to individual players, not the dominoes, the plants that we use to mark our territory as we're renaturing, every player gets a few neutral ones as well. And in the two-player game, you get a ton of neutral ones. And you can really use those in an offensive manner to try just to rip victory without giving yourself anything, just really trying to screw with your opponent. And it was a bit too much for us. We were like, oh man, I'm sorry I have to do this. I know you worked really hard. You're going to get a lot of points. No, you're not, because I'm just going to throw a neutral in there that ties you. Doesn't even have to beat you, just ties you so you don't get anything. And then because I was suddenly in last place, I jump into first place. It's a cool scoring mechanism. And at higher player counts, where you don't have very many neutral tokens, I don't think it'd be a problem. But in a two-player game, I forget, it's like not quite half of your tokens are neutral to emulate a higher player count, and it just made the game super cutthroat. And as much as we like the theme, we like the presentation, we love the dominoes, we even were okay with the area control, but those neutral things just really let you stick a knife in a lot, and they're a bit too mean-spirited for us. I suspect this game would go over gangbusters with us at a higher player count. But as it is, as a two-player game, Renature makes our number 21 of the month. Then we've got number 20, Sabotage, which I'm not going to sing the song, although now it's in my head. I shouldn't even have said it like that. But anyway, oh man. Okay, got it. All right, focus. Alrighty, Sabotage from Tim Fowers. This is a ginormous box game that is all about spies versus spies, or more to the point, spies breaking into an evil villain's secret lair, and that represents one team of players, two spies, sneaking around trying to shut down doomsday machines. The other two players, because this is a team-based game, are the supervillains traveling around trying to find these spies, because everybody's playing on either side of a big dividing wall. So this is a lot of deduction, hidden movement type stuff. Driven by dice, interestingly enough. Every round, there's 4 dice rolled, and these are the dice that all players get to use. So, I might think I know what you're doing, Spy. I know where you're going. I know what you want to do, but I realize, oh, you didn't roll this. There are no 6s rolled this round. So you can't do it. And therefore, I think maybe that means you're going to try and do something else or go in a different direction. Unless maybe you've earned some tokens that let you change the value of dice. And I'm not quite sure. Have you used those yet? What's going on here? And it's a brilliant game. Actually, Tim Powers published another game, which actually made my recent top 10 fillers, called Fugitive, which was a 2-player only game where one player is the fugitive trying to get away from the marshal who's hunting him down. This kind of feels like that on steroids. It's a big, huge monster production, gorgeous miniatures for the characters and the Doomsday machines. The box itself unfolds to become this big screen that makes you feel like you're in a secret lair. Everything about it is gorgeously produced, and the gameplay is super duper sharp. Here's why it came in at number 20. Ideally, this game is played best as a 4-player game with 2 teams of 2, because then the supervillains, they have to talk and the spies can hear it. The spies have to talk and the supervillains can hear it. And so you get that cross chatter, because this game is all about trying to anticipate what your opponents are going to do. And that's very, very cool. This game is definitely best as 4. You can play it competitively as a 2-player game, but that means each player has to control... If I have 2 spies, I have to control 2 spies. You have to control 2 villains. It works. It's much more chess-like because there's no chatter to overhear, but I don't think it has the same zest and life that it would as a 4-player game. And now here's the interesting thing. The reason I really wanted to seek it out is because you can also play it 2-player cooperatively, because there is a downloadable app that will control the supervillains who are traveling around the board trying to track us down while we sneak around trying to shut down the super weapons. And that's what really intrigued me, because when it was on Kickstarter a couple of years ago, I played an early prototype of it, and I thought, this is great. And so I really wanted to try the final thing. Again, the production is great. The gameplay is solid. Here's our issue. The cooperative game works. Jen and I sat down. We definitely had interesting decisions to make. It seems like the AI-controlled villains, the app works pretty well. The AI villains are interesting opponents, but ultimately, Jen and I found without that human competition, we were ultimately able to beat them pretty easily. And they just didn't provide as much challenge ultimately as we wanted. And the game has a little bit you can do to kind of mess with the difficulty, but not enough to where it was an interesting challenge. Plus, I'll be honest, what Jen and I really want to cooperatively do with this game is team up and be the supervillains. Because I think the supervillain players have the tougher role. Because they're trying to protect, they're trying to be reactive to the proactive spies. And I hope somewhere down the line, the app is expanded to allow for that side of the co-op as well. Because if so, this game would rocket quite a bit higher and it would probably become a keeper for us. I don't think I recommend the game unless you're being able to play it as a 4-player game. It works as a 2-player chess match battle of wits if you're looking for that. But Jen and I, we don't want to be quite so counter-move against each other. The cooperative game works, and if you could play as both sides and the difficulty were tweaked to be a bit higher, and the other thing that's missing from the app is when you're playing against that app, it just sits there silently and doesn't give you anything to feed off of. It doesn't have that human energy. I kind of wish the app almost had just like a little, if you remember the old Sid Meier's Civilization, talking head, just taunting us or doing something so we feel like we're against a living opponent, as opposed to an app that just reports, well, there was a flamethrower was fired over here. Did it affect you? And it becomes a little cold and impersonal, and I think they could have done a little bit more to give the app more of a sense of personality. So that's what's missing. Sabotage actually made, no pun included, it was their #1 game of the year for 2019, and they're very respected reviewers, and it makes total sense, but they'd be the first to say, as a 4-player game. Jen and I play as a 2-player game, and it's good. We've enjoyed it, and I'm hoping the app kind of grows over time. We will see, but currently, Sabotage is my number 20 of the month. Then we've got number 19, Dungeon Drop, Dropped Too Deep, which is another paid Kickstarter preview. It's an expansion for a game I covered last year, and Dungeon Drop is so cool. It's this idea of you get a whole bunch of cubes that represent monsters and treasures and walls or pillars, and you shake them up in your hand, you drop them, it spreads all, and that creates a dungeon. And then players competitively try to eyeball the most interesting rooms in that dungeon to loot without getting killed by monsters using their special powers, because you get a race with special abilities and a class with special abilities, and it's very neat. The original game was great. This expansion adds a lot of really cool stuff to the core game. All of it is good. New player powers, new types of cubes, and also some tweaks to the original game that makes the original game retroactively even better. But what I was really excited about with Drop Too Deep was it also introduces co-op rules. So you could play this cooperatively instead of competitively. And I think the co-op rules work okay, but at the end of the day, Dungeon Drop, I think, is still best as a competitive game. Particularly because the co-op rules don't really have anything built into them to deal with, like, quarterback alpha players. And not that that's a problem for me and Jen, but I would worry that some people might have a problem. If you have people in your life who tend to be very domineering in a cooperative game, they will be domineering in this game, and I would have liked to see a couple of little tweaks to the co-op mode to minimize that if at all possible. I mean, and that's really not the fault of the game. That means play with people who aren't jerks, but it is a little bit of a problem in otherwise a lovely and wonderful box full of goodies. If you enjoy Dungeon Drop at all, you gotta get this. Bringing in the cool little, the cubes that represent the super boss monsters that have faces. I mean, it just adds so much more pizzazz and zest to the game. Watch my run through if you want to know more, or my paid preview, I should say. But yeah, it's a great addition to the game. I just would like to see a little bit more work put into that co-op mode to bump it up a few more notches, which is why it's number 19, Dungeon Drop Too Deep. Moving on to number 18, which is Mariposas. This is a very hotly anticipated game by the industry and by me because it is Elizabeth Hargrave's follow-up to Wingspan. And now that's an over-exaggeration. First of all, Elizabeth Hargrave did put out another game between Wingspan and this called Tussie Mussie, but that was a very cute, tiny little micro game. It was like a contest she entered, and they turned it into a game. Mariposas is her follow-up in terms of big box experience. Lots of components, lots of art, lots of theme, and a big, compelling game. And Wingspan is one of the best games to have come out in years. It's an amazing freshman effort from a designer. And so a lot was riding on Mariposas. Her big, even though it's from a different publisher, to be fair, it's her next big box game. And I gotta say, Mariposas delivers. This is a very, very sharp, well-considered, beautifully designed, wonderfully elegant, definitely much lighter. This is almost a Gateway or a Gateway Plus style game, whereas Wingspan was definitely a heavier engine builder. This is all about monarch butterflies migrating north from Mexico through North America, spawning, going through multiple generations. You will see butterflies die so that others can continue on in their footsteps with special powers and variable objectives. A lot of really good stuff. Overall, it's very well considered. My only problem, my thing that kept this out of, say, easily the top 15, maybe even the top 10, is for 2-player, there is no scaling. And that's kind of a bummer because one of the objectives you can chase after is basically trying to find hidden cards and do set collection based off of, all the cities have these way stations and they're all face down at the beginning of the game. And in a 4-player game, those way stations are going to be hit by a lot of players. So over time, more and more they'll be revealed and you can make a strategy out of it. If you're playing a 2-player game and I go for way stations and you don't, I pretty much got to search them all by myself. And so I'm having to do the work of 2 or 3 players, which means my strategy has to become so focused and is so luck dependent that it just drives me nuts that the tiniest bit of extra work wasn't done for scaling. There's actually a brilliant decision. One of the posters on my video suggested, and I think this would fix it instantly, that every time a player in a 2-player game makes it to a city and they reveal a way station so you know more about the set collection there, that player also gets to reveal any other city anywhere they want on the board. So that kind of replicates in 2 players doing way stations. It's like 4 players' work is getting done. That would just be an instant super fix. And you know what? I hope that Elizabeth and publisher AEG step forward and maybe say, you know what, we like that. That's an official variant now. Because honestly, as I said earlier, I'm just not that keen on unofficial variants when it boils right down to it. Because I don't want to do tens of hundreds of hours of playtesting, make sure an unofficial house rule doesn't break things. But if the designer or the publisher says, no, that will actually work, and if that makes it fun as for a 2-player, do it. So fingers crossed that comes along, or something else, because this game is nearly flawless. And as a 4-player game, I think it's just the epitome of design, elegance, and beauty. But as a 2-player game, I would have liked to see some player scaling. It wasn't there. So that's why currently it sits at number 18 of the month, Mariposas. Then we go on to number 17, Rossio, which is a very, very cool tile laying game. Everybody's working in a communal area. And what's interesting about this game is there are a series of public objective cards that players are drafting for. And when I grab this particular card, everybody knows I want to try to make this. This is actually based off of a real square it was either in Portugal or Spain somewhere. And we are basically the architects who have been hired to decorate the square with all these wonderful, colorful tiles. But we're trying to create specific patterns of tiles because we have objectives that mean we can score points. But once we've got these objectives active, we only get a small window of time to score them before they go away. So if I've got this objective that says, hey, I want a row of 4 red tiles, and I've worked really hard, and you haven't stopped me because players are working in a communal area to get those 4 red tiles, now's the time I score it, and I'll get to score it for the next couple of rounds, and then it's gone. So knowing when to score, or wait, can I get 2 of these rows out, and then I should score it? But is the game almost over, and I won't get to score it the full 3 times? There's very interesting considerations in this game for timing. Because, once you play these cards, the cards you have are multi-use. You either play them so that you can declare, this is what I'm scoring, and for the next couple rounds you get to score, and then they're gone. Or you play them face down and say, for the next few rounds, this card will just generate more money so I can buy more stuff and have more control over the tile laying and the card drafting. And that's brilliant. It's such a simple idea, and it works really wonderfully. The tension of when do I play this card? I'm out of money, but I could just score one more time if I get this out. Really great stuff. Honestly, if it weren't for the fact that this is a fairly cutthroat game, this would have ranked much higher. Here's the thing. Like I said, folks, this is a game where it's a communal plaza that we're building. And you can see what I want to score. You know what card I drafted. And it means you spend a lot of time in this game trying to build your own patterns that you want, but also trying to cut the other player off so they can never finish that pattern that you know they want, because they paid a lot for that card. And it got we spent too much time in this game focusing equally, because it's a 2-player game, so every point I make you lose is a point I gain, basically. So we spent an equal amount of time not building ourselves up, but slowing each other down, and it was just a little bit too much in your face. If this was a game where everybody was building their own private plaza, oh my gosh, it would be amazing. Because everything else about this game, if you don't mind a little bit of cutthroat, oh, I see what you're trying to do there. You're trying to get a second one so you can score an additional 6 points for the next 2 turns. No, that's not going to happen. Boom, I put this tile down. Your hopes and dreams are dashed. But if you like that, or if you play at a higher player count, where you can't afford to target one player and try to cut them off, and so instead you just build your own things, I think either way, Rossio is going to be a blast, and it should have made my top 10 of the month. But as a 2-player game, it's once again the zero-sum nature of it makes it more cutthroat than it otherwise would be, and it became too cutthroat for us, even though I loved everything. The way that the restrictions on how you lay tiles is great, the drafting is great, the limited windows for scoring, everything about this game is super sharp, and I highly recommend it as for Care Bears who want a higher player count, or if you're at the lower player count, people who don't mind a little bit of sneaky backstabbery. That's my number 17, Rossio. We got number 16, Sonora. This is a brilliant idea. This is replacing the roll and write with flicking, because we are playing half of this game is flicking discs out onto a board, trying to hit certain targets that represent different areas of the Sonoran desert, so that we can score points in different ways, because wherever our discs end up means we trigger them and score them on one of 4 spaces on our private roll and write boards. And each one of these 4 boards for, what is it, the desert, the canyon, the ruins, and the mud cracks, I believe. Each one of them is basically its own little mini game. All 4 of these areas score in very different ways. And one of the big things is there's a lot of crossover between this. I could be scoring really hard in the River Creek and trigger bonuses that allow me to then do combo chains that score in other areas, and there's a lot of that. So the writing part is great. Think of kind of like a slightly lighter but even more varied with like 4 completely different mini games versions of Gone Shown Clever, and that's saying something. And then on back to the original thing, the disc flicking is really good too, because everybody gets 2 things. They get their discs are valued. So you want to get, do I want to get my level 1 disc in this area or my level 5 disc? Because that's going to feed into how I score, in the writing part. But also, I love this idea, and I'd love to see it more. When it's your turn, you get to flick 2 discs. It's not like my turn, I flick 1, then the next player. I get to flick 2, and that is so great. Your first flick could be a test, and your second, if you're feeling a little rusty, or your first flick, oh, that failed, I'll use my second flick to knock the first flick. Lots of cool ideas there. So overall, this is great. Why did it not come in higher? Why is it number 16? I have one complaint about it. There is nothing in the way of any kind of variability to represent skill level. And if I'm a significantly better dexterity flicker than you, I will crush you. There's no 2 ways about it. The best you could possibly do is saying, well, okay, I cannot target, I cannot hit the targets like you can. All I can do is just flick wildly and create chaos and knock things around. And that's what Jen and I found. She could not beat me because I'm just a better disc flicker than her. And so she had no strategy to her flicking, and instead she just kept flicking my stuff and couldn't actually target her own things. And I really wish there was something else, something like, it has a system where players can earn reflicks. So like maybe at the end of every round, whoever is behind gets extra reflicks. So if they're falling behind because their flicking skills aren't as good, rather than just having to go full chaos agent, I'll just destroy everything because I can't target anything I want. Give them some more reflicks to, as a compensation. Because, this is true for any dexterity game. If I'm better at the dexterity element than you, I'm probably going to win. And so you bring dexterity into a roll and right, you're going to have this issue. I wish they would have addressed it. I think there are a few ways they could have done, and if they had, this would have ranked significantly higher. That said, it's a keeper. We really like it anyway, even if there's no built-in handicaps, and Jen really suffers as a result in our number 16 of the month, Sonora. Then we go on to number 15, Alice's Garden, which is another one of those polyomino tile laying style games that are all the rage. Think Tetris turned into a board game. And, so there have been a bunch of them. What makes this one special? There's a couple of things. The biggest one is that the tiles that we're going to be drafting from every round, the shape of the tiles is actually chosen by players. It is not just left to fate that you draw randomly and you just get what you get like regular Tetris. Players have a lot of control, and that becomes a very interesting strategic, because you don't know what's going to be on the pieces, but you can decide what the shape of the piece is going to be, and that just gives you a lot more control than what you normally see in these style games, and that's very cool. Another thing I really like, I love the theme, and I love the way that the thematic elements are integrated into the gameplay. This could have just been a completely abstract game, but the developers went the extra mile and tried to make the world come alive and make consistent thematic sense. Very nice. Not all. Some games just don't even bother. Again, I mentioned Gone Shown Clever a lot this month, but I appreciate that they did integrate theme and they did it well. There's one other element about this game that I really liked a lot the first few times, I should say, Jen and I played it, but that's because I got one rule wrong. There's this interesting thing that if you play wrong, and when you watch my run through, you'll see I talk about this in the final thoughts. To contradict everything I just said earlier in this run through, I have a house rule to propose for this game because we played wrong our first couple times, and it so improves the game. And I am rating Alice's Garden, number 15, as a really solid kind of like 7 out of 10, great little Tetris-y game that we like a lot and we're keeping. This would have been my number 6 of the month, played with our house rule. And that's in spite of the fact that, as I said earlier, I don't like house rules. I'm worried it might break the balance of the game. I'm trying to contact the publisher right now to find out, does my variant break the game? Because it makes the game so much better! And it would have been my number 6 of the month. And so maybe it ultimately will be if the publishers say, yeah, that works, that doesn't break anything. That's a nice kind of hardcore variant that really ratchets up the tension and creates some new decisions that you have never seen in any Tetris-style game before that makes the game brilliant. Makes it a solid 8. But as it is, I'm leaving it based on the official rules, which is why Alice's Garden is my number 15 of the month. And again, my run-through will go up shortly for that. I'm just waiting on Polo to goof check it, and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about then. So anyway, let's move on then to number 14, The School of Sorcery. Dr. Finn is back. This is a remake of one of his best games ever, The Institute of Magical Arts. And It's really, really interesting. The core game is still the same. This is a battle line style game where each of us are vying for dominance over a row of cards that represent points or special abilities. And the way it works is every round we roll some dice, and everybody sees what everybody's rolled. And then everybody has cards that they secretly deploy to the different dice. And then we reveal at the same time what I do with that 5, what I do with that 2, and we see how everything shakes out. It's always been a brilliant system. It's still a brilliant system now. And in fact, the main difference between School of Sorcery and Institute is it's been streamlined. Some of the weird kind of quirky out there rules have been kind of stripped away. You don't have to worry about resource gathering anymore as an action you have to do. Now it just happens automatically, so you can focus just on the area control. And overall, it's kind of, I would say it's a slicker, more polished design. Although, interestingly, I'm surprised, it feels like, and I have to go back and check. Right now, I'm just going to say it feels like it actually plays a little bit longer. Like 10 or 15 minutes longer than the original game did. I always felt like Institute was a very quick game. Originally, I put it on my filler list. My first filler list I did 5 years ago because it was a fast game. I wouldn't put School of Sorcery. It takes a bit longer. It takes like a good 30, 40 minutes because this is a 2-player only game. And don't get me wrong, that is a tense, fun-filled 30 or 40 minutes, with trying to second guess your opponent. Are they going to zig and they're going to zag? And plus, I should say, some new elements have been introduced that are brilliant. But I'll be honest, I kind of miss some of the quirkiness of the original Institute of Magical Arts. Some of the things that were stripped out to make the game just more tight and focused. I really liked the astral plane and some of the other stuff. And I kind of liked, I don't automatically generate resources. I've got to devote some of my dice to doing that, which means I might be, if I'm falling behind, as opposed to everybody just like constantly getting an influx. So it's only the fight. Now you have to decide, in the original, you have to decide, when do I step away from the fight? Now it's all the fight all the time. And it's still great. It's my number 14 of the month, but I think, I think for a certain type of player, this is significantly better because it's easier to learn. It doesn't have quite the weird little rules, and it's much more in your face. It's much more interactive. You're always focusing on trying to second guess your opponent with some really cool bluff moves you can pull off that are brilliant additions. But I still might like Institute better. But don't get me wrong, they're both great. But anyway, that's currently my number 14 of the month. The School of Sorcery. Okay. Then we go on to number 13, or do we? There we go. Come on, PowerPoint. There you go. Dreamscape, the expansions. Now, I covered Dreamscape a couple of years ago. Heck, went back before I left Malta when it was on Kickstarter. And I thought it was a brilliant, puzzly, travel around this, dreamlike universe, activate all kinds of cool special powers to harvest shards that you can use to build your own dreams to score lots of points. Thought the base game was brilliant, and I finally got a full retail copy of the game. And the retail copy has, as part, in addition to the retail copy of the game, which, by the way, is still brilliant, a couple of little tweaks have been made to the original game. I mean, actually, one I'm not quite sure I like as much. In the prototype I did, you played through 5 rounds and you got 5 turns each, 5 turns each round. Now you play through 6 rounds and you get 4. So you get 1 less turn overall. That's no big deal. Because instead you're getting more opportunities to get end of round bonuses, because there's now 6 end of round bonuses instead of 5. So that all comes out in the wash. But I kind of like the bigger, heavier turns where you're doing 5 things on a turn instead of 4. Although, to be fair, that just made the game much more analysis paralysis-y. And so probably the new 6 and 4 is better than the 5 and 5. But I kind of miss the old one. It'd be easy to change, I suppose. But anyway, beside the point. What I decided to do when I got the new thing, I was just, should I do a run through? Oh my gosh, look at all these expansions. 4 different little mini modular standalone expansions. You can mix and match however you want. And I was reading them. Oh my God, these are so brilliant. Why don't I cover these? And so I did this crazy run through where I showed one of them, the dream animals. And then I talked about the other 3 and how they all change things up. And so my number 13 of the month is Dreamscape with all these expansions because it was already a brilliant game and it's just gotten better. So thematic. Everything in this game is driven by the rules and consistencies and the narrative of this Dreamscape, or sometimes Nightmarescape, depending on which modules you're playing with. And everything I loved about it 3 years ago, I still think is absolutely amazing with my number 13 of the month, the Dreamscape expansions. Okay. Then we go on to number 12, Monsters on Board, which is another paid preview for a game on Kickstarter. And this is a dice drafting game. And dice drafting is my number one highest ranked gameplay mechanism of all time. If you go back and watch my top 10 gameplay mechanisms, love dice drafting, as does Jen. And both Jen and I adored this game. It is full to the brim of gorgeous art from the Miko, very evocative. It has kind of a silly, fun theme of monsters trying to scare all the villagers, not kill them, just scare them a little bit because they feed off the fear energy so that they can summon the big, I keep calling him Jack Skeleton, but Spider Jack, to score lots of points. And at first, it looks with the Spookmobiles, which is how you transfer dice from one player to the other. These cool little jalopy cars that hold the dice that represent all the monsters you invited to the big monster ball, basically. It's a really cute, adorable game, and you'd be forgiven for thinking, well, yeah, this is a game for families, for kids, right? No, do not be tricked. Do not judge this book by its cover. This is a crunchy, not heavy, but not medium. Definitely mid to heavyweight game, because as you're drafting these dice, these are multi-use dice, and there are so many things you do with them. There's so much consideration you have to take into account. Not only the normal, I can't let you have that because it's really good for you, but am I using these to work in the ritual, to make money, to buy more stuff? The dice all have different strengths in terms of how many resources they bring in, but also what's usually the more resources they bring in, the less, or victory points, I should say, they bring in, the fewer special powers they give you. Plus, the game, again, is gorgeous. It's got really awesome minis, unless you go for the standee version. But even the standees look adorable because it's the Miko art. And it's really sharp. Really enjoyed this one quite a bit. But it just goes to show how great this month was, because, the top 10, these are crackerjack games, just across the board. So my number 12 is Monsters on Board. Then we go on to number 11, Village Green. And this is a very sharp, fast-playing little card game where we are playing cards out to a grid. And the interesting thing is, there's two types of cards. The Village Green cards, which represent how we're beautifying our little bucolic village, putting in trees and structures and different types of flowers. And there's another type of card, and we're playing those cards, the green cards, into a 3x3 grid. And we're really restricted in where we can, because we have to put matching things next to each other. So there's a tight little puzzle there, super tight, super tough to pull off. But we're also grabbing cards that we can put on the outskirts of our town. That means, hey, if I put this card in the third column, all the cards in the third column score this way. But at the same time, I put this one in the second row, all the cards in the second row. So now the card I put in the place has to fulfill both of these objectives that I chose. And so I am creating my own problems by, and it's a really sharp, puzzly design. We did have one issue with it, was it had kind of a weird anticlimactic ending where the ending just kind of drug on a little bit. And originally I was going to actually rate this quite a bit lower. But I talked to the developers about it, and they said, yeah, we can see what you're saying. In a two-player game, that could definitely happen. Tell you what, and they released an official variant that fixed it for me. And so this is kind of like, this is what I'm hoping for something, like when I talked about Mariposas and I talked about Alice's Garden, just a little bit tiny more work of tightening things up for two-player, fingers crossed, because Village Green got that extra love. And I talk about it in the final thoughts to describe what it is, just a couple little tweaks that makes the game really purr. And so that's why it's a super sharp design, and it comes in at number 11, Village Green. Then we go on to number 10, the Viscounts of the West Kingdom. This is the third and I guess final game in the West Kingdom series. They previously had Architects of the West Kingdom and Paladins of the West Kingdom. And all three of these games are really brilliant, wonderfully crunchy and combo-laden, Euros with, again, great art from the Miko and really sharp design. And I think that what everybody want to know is, well, how do I rank them? As far as I'm concerned, Viscounts is the best. I rate at the top. I do think arguably Paladins is maybe the overall best design, but Paladins I had some real problems with just blind luck draws that really kind of impacted the end results that I hated and I wished wasn't there. Whereas Viscounts, I have no real complaints at all. This is just a brilliant game, and the core of it, it's actually kind of similar to the same system I talked about earlier in Rossio, where you put cards into play, and they're going to stay in play for a few rounds, and they keep sliding over, and you have to keep feeding new cards with new abilities and objectives and powers, and then the old ones go out. Viscounts takes that idea from Rossio and turns it into a much heavier game, as opposed to a more gateway-ish, tile laying game, and it's brilliant. It works so well. And yeah, I mean, there's so many paths to victory here. With all the special powers you get, the production is great. It's just, knocks it out of the park. The best of the West Kingdom. Although, who knows? The saga of the West Kingdom is coming soon. But it turns all three West Kingdom games into cooperative games. Maybe that'll shift things around. But yeah, super impressed by the brilliant, lovely production and the really sharp gameplay of my number 10 of the month, Viscounts of the West Kingdom. Then we go on to number 9, Unforgiven, which is another paid preview. And this one actually isn't out yet. This goes, I think it launches on the 6th, if I recall correctly, of October. It'll be coming soon, anyway. And so you'll see the run through at that point. But I filmed it last month because I had to get the prototype into the mail to go to another reviewer ASAP. And so I did, and folks, this is hyperbole of the highest order, which is why I, again, remind you, this is a paid preview, so if you want to take my opinions with a grain of salt and all that, to me, this is a Seven Wonders duel killer. And that's saying something, because Seven Wonders Duel is one of the highest rated games in the entire board game industry. I think it's in the top 20 on Board Game Geek as the highest, most loved games of all time. Unforgiven takes a lot of the core drafting pyramid elements of Seven Wonders Duel, but then melds that with a much richer and more engaging and intricate game that we're trying to win. Seven Wonders, don't get me wrong, Seven Wonders Duel is great, but for me and Jen, it was too cutthroat. Unforgiven shows Seven Wonders Duel how it's done. It's wonderfully thematic. It's based on the real historical trial of one of the alleged conspirators in the Abraham Lincoln assassination plot. Turned out in real history, she was the first woman to ever be executed by the federal government of the United States, and it's still a hotly contested trial to this day if she was innocent or not. And so players will get to replay history and see if maybe they can save her instead. And it's all through drafting all these cards from the pyramid. Although it's cool, it's a double pyramid that goes in both ways, so it's kind of like Spinal Tap taking it to 11, and it works. It's so cool. There are, at any given time, 4 different tug of wars we're playing, and you could be engaging in those tug of wars. You could ignore that and try to focus on the jurors that are right in front of you, as opposed to vying for the ones that are on the common card. There are dice that are constantly coming in. You can buy them to supplement the cards you're drafting. This game is just super duper smart, and every turn, almost without exception, I'd be like, I need to know what you're doing. If I take this, are you going to take that? And it works so well. And the attention to historical detail, really bringing basically telling a new story that brings history to life, is very much appreciated as well. It's my number 9 of the month. Although, like I said, it doesn't go on Kickstarter for another week or so. Unforgiven. Then we go on to number 8, Endless Winter, which is also launching on Kickstarter, I think in late October. But again, I had to get the video done earlier so it could get sent on to another reviewer. So that's why you gotta consider this a paid real preview, because the Kickstarter's coming in a few weeks. This is another game, first of all, let's get out of the way, full of gorgeous art by the Miko. And I'm so happy, folks, that the Miko is my number 1. If you ever go back and watch, spoiler alert, for my top 10 game artists, the Miko was my number 1. This has been a very good Miko month. And, and Endless Winter looks gorgeous. But aside from that, it is a brilliant prehistoric worker placement game. There's a couple of things that really makes it stand out from other worker placement games. One is the worker placement is incredibly tight. There are only 4 worker placement spots, but any number of players can go to the spots. It's just that the first player to go to one of the actions that lets you, expand your tribe or gather resources or go hunting for, animals that you can convert into points or pelts or food or whatever. All the kind of stuff you would expect thematically. So there's only 4 actions. The first player to do one of the actions gets a huge bonus, like a game-changing bonus. So if you go to the action I wanted to do, you then leave me with a tough choice, because I really wanted to do that, but now I don't get the bonus. Do I go ahead and do it anyway, or do I wait until next round? Because if I can get there ahead of you, and in this game, it is rare I have seen a game where turn order matters as much as here. You are constantly aware of turn order. Will I be able to get there first this round, or should I not? If I don't, I should go on ahead and do this now. Burn in the hand, two in the bush type stuff. So that stuff is brilliant. Really good. That's why it's my number 8 of the month. But that's not all. Because the workers, this is also a deck builder of sorts. Because when I send a worker out, I can supplement them with cards from my deck that make them stronger or give them different abilities and whatnot. And so I am having to make tough choices. Where do I send my workers? How do I supplement them with the cards that I've recruited? It's just great. This game, I think this is really going to blow up on Kickstarter. It really should. Jen and I loved it. This was another one that easily made Jen's top of the month. This would be in her top 3. It's my number 8. Really good stuff. The Endless Winter. I think the full title is Endless Winter Paleo-American Saga or something like that. But anyway, let's move on now to number 7. Café. And this is a tiny little game. This is just basically a deck of cards and some cubes, although they are tarot-sized cards. And this is a game that is the latest in a gameplay style that is fast working its way up into my favorite ranks. When I do in a few years my revisit of my top 10 favorite mechanisms, what I'm calling card patching or card patchwork might make it into my top 10. This is the idea that I put a card down. These cards have little grids with different icons on them, and I put more cards either adjacent or on top of existing cards to try to create patterns within these little tableaus. I'm kind of patching these cards together. I love this. I love it in Honshu and Hokkaido. I loved it in Carson City, the card game. I loved it in Sprawlopolis. And there's so many of them. I love it going years ago back into Hanging Garden. I loved it in Patch History. It's a great mechanism. And here's the deal, folks. Café is probably one of the best implementations of it ever. Because up until Café, all games that do this, you're pretty much patching the cards together for one main purpose, to try to create certain patterns of icons to score points in various and sundry ways. You still do that in Café, but there's an extra element. Not only am I trying to get these cards put together to get them well laid out to make nice patterns, but also I'm building an engine. Because this is a game where I am running a full coffee industry of growing and harvesting the beans, drawing the beans, roasting the beans, and then shipping them back and serving them. And so, the patterns I'm trying to make is to create a more efficient, easy to run engine to generate coffee. And this adds such an incredible level of extra depth that so eclipses any other card patching game that I've seen. And I believe I've played most of them now, that I was just blown away. Jen and I were just gobsmacked how sharp and clever, and why has no one else done this before? Because it's great. And it's my number 7 of the month, Café. And I say that in spite of the fact Jen and I have zero interest in the subject matter. Jen wished it was cocoa beans instead of coffee beans, but c'est la vie, Café, number 7, great stuff. But there's even more, because number 6 is Marco Polo 2 in Service of the Con, which we did as a live playthrough in front of an internet audience. Jen and me played through the whole game from start to finish, had a great time. Did make a couple of goofs at the end, which unfortunately Polo's never going to check that, but c'est la vie. Still, it gave a good impression of what the game feels like, and the game feels great. Marco Polo was already, Merchants of the Silk Road, was already a fantastic dice worker placement game. And the interesting thing is, In Service of the Con originally started out as an expansion to the original, but the more they developed it, the more they said, you know what, we've made enough changes, we want to make it its own separate standalone. And, I don't know, personally, I would have rather they just made it an expansion and kept the same, but as it is, we are definitely going to keep both. And what everybody wants to know is, well, if I'm only going to buy one, which should I get, Marco Polo 1 or Marco Polo 2? There are a lot of really cool ideas, really neat special powers, so much fun stuff, which is why I wish it was just an expansion. But if you're trying to decide, should you get Marco Polo or Marco Polo 2, it comes down to how challenging do you want the game? Because if there's one unique thing, memorable thing about Marco Polo is you have to work incredibly hard to get meager wins. You have to really struggle. And the game really puts you through the ringer and forces AAA quality play out of you to be able to accomplish major things like traveling the entirety of the Silk Road, for example. Marco Polo 2 decides to take it easy on players. You're still doing, but really the only big change is instead of going from west to east, now we start out in the east and we're heading west because we, we're in the Service of the Con now instead of, Italian and European explorers heading east. But anyway, the 2 just makes everything much more laid back, much more relaxed. It is much easier to get the resources you need. You can do things with ease that would have seemed impossible to achieve in the original game. And so it really comes down to, what do you want more? Do you want a game that really puts you through the ringer, or a game that takes it easy? Because they're both great. And the interesting thing was playing it, I personally prefer the original Marco Polo. Jen preferred this. And so this has actually pushed my overall ranking of Marco Polo up a couple of points on Board Game Geek, because I've combined them into one thing to me, because this still feels like an expansion. It's just an expansion where you have to buy a full box worth of stuff instead of an expansion's worth of stuff, because you can actually mix and match components from the two games, interestingly. So anyway, Marco Polo was always great. Marco Polo 2, depending on your predilections as a player, is maybe only a little bit less good or significantly better. But either way, it's my number 6 of the month. Marco Polo 2 in service of the con. Then we go on to number 5. And, oops. Okay, where are we? Here we go. Oh, I clicked the wrong button. Here we go. Number 5, once again, PowerPoint. Truffle Shuffle. Yeah. This was a really interesting month, folks. I mean, there were so many really amazing, big box, super expensive, the Viscounts of the West Kingdom and type stuff. Games are just totally in our wheelhouse. But this month had a lot of really amazing, tight little, just a deck of cards, look all the gameplay we squeeze out of it style games as well. And Truffle Shuffle, if I recall correctly, was the best of them. Coming in at number 5 this month, this is a brilliant game that, well, like Unforgiven before it, takes the pyramid draft structure of Seven Wonders Duel and makes a game that Jen and I love so much more than Seven Wonders Duel. And this is from the design trio. I can't remember their names now. Molly, Sean, and Martin? I don't remember. But anyway, the design trio behind last year's super hit Point Salad. And earlier this year, I covered another game, Dollars to Donuts. So these three love making food-themed games. And we've got a pyramid. We are drafting. Half the cards are face down, half the cards are face up. We're trying to get cards for the simple purpose of completing orders by making certain sets. 3 of a kind, 4 of a kind, straights, straight flushes, all that kind of stuff to score points. And the gameplay here is so brilliant, so sharp. Because a lot of the cards you get have special powers that let you break the rules and take double turns or change the color or the number on cards and whatnot. It is just a blast. It is a delight. We think it's absolutely brilliant. There's a high level of tension because you have no hand limit. You can collect as many cards as you want, trying to go for that super high scoring thing. But here's the deal. You're going to go through 3 pyramids, and when a pyramid is emptied, if you still have cards in your hand, you lose almost all of them. So as the pyramid is getting closer and closer to emptying out, you are like, I gotta fulfill an order. I'm gonna lose all these cards. But if I can just get one more card, I can have the super order. Do I push my luck or do I bail now? Really good stuff. We really love this one a lot. It could have even gone a little bit higher, but there were some vagaries in the rules, unfortunately, that meant I had to completely refilm the entire run-through because... me and not alone, Tom Vassell also made the same mistake in his video because of the way the wording is in the rules. Don't worry, you can watch my new run through. It straightens it all out. So I'm maybe knocking at one just because the rules could have been a little bit clearer, which is a shame because otherwise I love everything about my number 5 of the month, Truffle Shuffle. All right. Then we go on to number 4, The City, 2nd edition. I lied, folks. There was one other big game in a tiny box, and that is The City. Now, I actually covered The City years ago, back when I was living in Malta, the 1st edition, which was not available in English. It's taken a long time, but The City has finally, it got a reprint, it added new types of cards, tweaked the rules a little bit, or hardly at all, really. Maybe not even at all. Maybe it was just the new cards were added now that I think about it. But anyway, The City has always been phenomenal. The City is basically taking all the rich combo, tableau building, spending cards to use other cards, beautiful gameplay of San Juan or Race for the Galaxy. Pick either of those games, and My City takes that core kernel and compresses it down into a diamond of brilliance, and we love it. We also love its sister title, Jump Drive, which has a slightly different feel. This one is more about or that one's more engine building. This one is more about combo making, really. But either one is fine, and it's a brilliant game. I have done a run through for it. No, I didn't do a run through for this. But again, you can go watch my original run through where I was playing the German version, and and we were in love with it then. We're even more in love with it now. It's my number 4 of the month. It's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant game. Although if you prefer sci-fi to Sim City style city building, go for Jump Drive instead. But honestly, the games are different enough. They're they have the same core gameplay, but what you do within the same engine to build different things to score the same types of points. It's great. It's my number 4 of the month. The City, 2nd edition. And now, folks, I'm going to get a little cheeky here. My number 3 of the month is Plunderous. And yes, it is a paid preview, even though this is a game that I've been working a lot on the development of it. Although it is my friend. I mean, I'm not the lead designer. At best, I'm a developer. Maybe you can consider me co-designer on the co-op expansion when we get that ready. We're working. I could be working on it right now, but I got to film this for you folks. But anyway, this was still a paid preview. So there is the double. Take my personal opinions with a grain of salt. Not only was I paid to do this, cover this video, because my friend insisted that I treat this like any other Kickstarter game, but also I have a direct hand in the development of this game. Although, full disclosure, I do not stand to make any monetary gain if the game funds or however well it does, or if it turns a profit or any of that stuff. I just liked helping my friend out, and I've spent 9 months working on making this game better and better. And this is actually the second time I've mentioned Plunderous in a roundup, because I actually played it a few months ago when on Tabletopia with my friend, because it was his birthday. And at that point, Plunderous had a minimum player count of 3. It was at least a 3-player game, and at the time that was it. It was going to be a 3 to 6 player game, and the co-op version that we were working on could make it a solo or 2 or 3 or 4 player game. So that was the goal at the time. Since then, the game has gone through a lot of evolutions, in big part because of the lessons we're learning from developing the co-op, and we were able to apply some of that stuff to the main game. And now I'm here to say Plunderous is a great 2-player game as well. And it's got a gorgeous table presence. It's a 4X pirate simulation where you're sailing the 7 seas, exploring islands, expanding your dominion over those islands, exploiting those islands for resources to convert to points, and exterminating. All 4Xs if you want to. Here's the thing. When Andy first told me about this game, I don't know, 4 years or so ago, this was a very war-heavy game. Nowadays, there is still the battle. If you want to have that extermination, you can. There can be a lot of in-your-face, players really going at each other, trying to move and counter-move against each other. But that's almost kind of antithetical to the heart of the game, because at this point, this game is a Euro. And unlike some Euros, like, say, Scythe, where a lot of people say, oh, Scythe, you don't have to attack. But if you go into Scythe without the willingness to engage in combat, it totally breaks the balance of the game. Because then players just start stockpiling stuff. They know no one will ever steal things. Mechs become underpowered. And the whole game breaks down. Plunderous is a game that is, first and foremost, it's really got a lot of Euro goods conversion, deck building, to create your crew, to get all kinds of combos, and yes, there is the ability to attack players as well. But in this game, there are always other ways to get stuff done. And if you don't want to, if you don't want to attack in Scythe, you'll break the balance of the game. If you don't want to attack in this game, it's totally fine, because there's a billion other things you can do. This is such a broad horizon, wide open, emergent gameplay game that is still driven by 3 separate objective systems that you can be manipulating and trying to play towards at any given time. It's just brilliant. So if you want to make big, gigantic mechs, this is a steampunk style game that will just terrorize the Caribbean, you can do it. If you just want to play a pick up and deliver game, you can do it. If you just want to focus on exploring and converting goods into points, you can do it. If you just really want to, do a lot of deck crafting, you can do it. Chances are you're going to do a lot of all of these things. If you want to engage in politics with other players, even as a 2-player game, negotiation is a huge part of this game. And it's so rare to see negotiation work in a 2-player scenario, and I love negotiating. I'm so happy and proud to be involved tangentially with the development of this game. When we finally get the co-op done, and I've got a prototype and I can film it, I'll probably revisit and give a ranking for how I feel Plunderous is as a co-op game. I am rating this, and again, this was a paid preview of a game that I have some hand in the development of. I'm rating it my number 3 because I am blown away more than anything else by the emergent gameplay world that is still given a very beautiful, strong sense of direction by 3 different objective systems so that you can truly play the way you want and get totally unique experiences every time. I've played Plunderous a few times now, and I just keep getting pulled in deeper and deeper, even though I have no interest in 25% of the game. Well, the interesting thing is, I play this game enough, it might pull me over to the dark side, and I might find myself doing some extermination, because that's a lot of fun, too. But anyway, that's it. My number 3, with all those caveats in place of the month, is Plunderous. Then we move on to number 2, Tiny Towns Villagers. Okay, this was the other big game in a little box. It's the second expansion for Tiny Towns. It's adorable because you get these villagers, which are these cute little brown meeples that look like squirrels, and I think an otter and a bird and a porcupine and whatnot. But the interesting thing is you put them on your little Tiny Town board, and if you can build a building on top of them, they then occupy that building, and that gives you access to special powers. And every time you play, just like all the combination of buildings is going to be unique every time you play Tiny Towns, the combinations of powers you get from the villagers is going to be unique every time as well. And this adds so much to the game, to what was already a nearly flawless game. Tiny Towns was already in my top 50 of all time. This only pushes it even higher. Jen and I had a blast playing it this month. I highly recommend it. If you love Tiny Towns, this will make you love it even more. And even if there weren't the villagers, just all the cool new buildings that do some very cool, really surprising outside of the box effects and powers. Just loved everything about my number 2 of the month, Tiny Towns Villagers. But folks, there is a number 1. And if you've been paying attention to the last few roundups, you might already know what it is. Say it with me, folks. My number 1 of the month is come on, PowerPoint. Wake up. Yes, Marvel Champions, The Rise of the Red Skull. Yeah, of course it is. It is no surprise at all that I love... Wait, are you playing? Shoot, my video seems to have frozen. PowerPoint, have you failed me? You were doing so well for so long, and now it seems like you are not playing. Oh, for heaven's sakes. This is what I get for trying to film in one take. I guess I could just go with this static picture, but I queued up video. Why are you not playing? Play. All right, that's the end of the slideshow. Play. There it is. Ugh. All righty, some growing pains there, folks. But anyway, my number 1 of the month is... I know what the problem is. I'm talking right now. By the way, this is a test I'm doing, folks. In my roundups up till now, you could always see the original video of me up in the top left corner of the game, playing the game, and I put a video of me filming the roundup down in the bottom right corner. Somebody suggested I should just override the old video of me with the new video of me so you can see more of the game. So I've done that, and that means I can't tell if the video is playing when it first starts. So that's a problem. But anyway, sorry, that's neither here nor there. That's some behind the scenes baseball there. But Rise of the Red Skull, I've been waiting for it since it was first announced. It's the first boxed expansion, instead of just like little packets of whatever it is, 60 or 70 cards to introduce new heroes or new villains. This was a big expansion that introduces 5 new scenarios, 2 new playable characters, a whole bunch of stuff, very cool new interesting ideas, and the idea of a campaign where you play through all 5 of the scenarios in sequential order, the events of what happens in one will bleed on into the future. It's a very, very simple campaign system. If I'm honest, I would have liked to see them maybe push it a little bit harder, but hey, this is the first step, and it's very promising for the future. And as always, I love Marvel Champions so much. This has finally pushed Marvel Champions now officially into my top 10 games of all time. The Rise of the Red Skull. And I thought it was going to be because of the campaign, but it's really, at this point, it's just undeniable. Every time I play Marvel Champions, I love it so much. I'm continually impressed by the way they keep bringing Marvel Comics to life with these very, very relatively simple and elegant compared to other games like Lord of the Rings, the card game, or Arkham Horror, the card game. Relatively elegant and straightforward, streamlined gameplay that is just a blast. I spent a Sunday playing through all 5 missions back to back solo, and oh man, I would happily be playing it right now, trying more combinations of stuff with Hawkeye and Black Widow finally showing up, going up against the Red Skull and Absorbing Man. And I mean, I'm a lifelong Marvel fan, so you always have to take my enthusiasm for Marvel Champions with that in mind. I mean, this is mainlining right back into my childhood and nostalgia triggers and all of that. Although, hey, I love the Marvel Cinematic Universe too. And yeah, this pushed over the top. That said, it did introduce something that I am worried about the future of Marvel Champions. The idea, the presumption. Oh, okay. Okay, let's try and reset this video again. Oh man, folks, things are going so well. But anyway, coming back. I am worried that the developers of Rise of Red Skull are starting to abandon one of the core guiding principles of the design of this game, which is that Marvel Champions Sessions tells the story of the heroic exploits and the day-to-day exploits of their heroes. And there is, while you spend more of your time in costume, because who doesn't want to be a superhero, there is an equal amount of love and attention put into the realities of these characters' day lives, which is because these missions aren't just quick one and done, hey, it was a big fight and everybody moved on. These missions last for hours, days, weeks, months. And so you spend a good deal of time out of costume, dealing with the loved ones in your life and other stuff. 2 of the 5 missions in Rise of the Red Skull pretty much completely abandon that and just say, we don't care about theme anymore. Yes, you could still, as Spider-Man, go back to Aunt May's house, even though it no longer makes any sense whatsoever. And it's always made sense. They have always stayed true to that they give the importance of the narrative of this game, the focus to ensure that you could truly feel like you're living the life of these heroes. And I'm worried that they're starting to abandon that because 2 of the 5 abandoned it here, and they didn't need to. There's a thread on Board Game Geek where somebody suggested some alternate takes on the thematic narrative settings of those 2 missions, and suddenly they work, and I hope this is not a harbinger of the developers saying, yeah, we don't really care about that whole family life thing. We're just all about the punching. Because if that continues, Marvel Champions will probably fall out of my top 10 games because it's important to me. The thing that allowed for the success of Marvel, back in the golden age of comics, was that focus on their personal lives, their life outside of the suits. And that was the most important thing about Marvel Champions to me, was the attention to detail there. And if they start abandoning that, I don't know, maybe I'm going to start abandoning the game too. But it was only 2 out of 5 missions. The other ones were great. And the gameplay was still great, but one of the things that makes puts Marvel Champions into my top 10 isn't just the gameplay, but it is the narrative. And so, fingers crossed, the narrative continues to deliver on the promise of Marvel Champions, which otherwise is still, anyway, at this point, it's my number 1 game of the month of September. And phew, that's it, folks. All right, sorry for the technical glitches there at the end. What are we at now? We are at 1 hour and 17 minutes. Hopefully you had fun. Hopefully you forgive me my excesses, ranking a game that I'm personally involved in at number 3. But again, at least I'm declaring it, so you can bear that in mind, but that's how I feel. Oh, by the way, did I mention Plunderous is also another game? This was a good month for Miko art fans. But it was just a good month overall, and we move into October. We start to see some Essen titles. I'm very excited about that. If you want to know more, you can hit that eye in the top right corner of the screen and go to my Coming Soon page, where I think by now I will have put together a preliminary list based on voter feedback for people who back me on Patreon. And otherwise, folks, we are done for the month. So in closing, I am going to say thank you once again, as always, to the fine folks at Funagames Games for supporting the show. And thanks for watching, everybody. Have a nice day. Talk to you later. So long. Bye-bye.